Hello. Hi, everybody. I'm like on dual screens for the first time, and this is strange, but fun and exciting. But hey, hey, wherever you're popping in from, just say hello. Let me know where you're here from. And for those of you who are just getting this live just because it's popping up in your feed, this is a live where Dr. Mario Bouquet, I'm a psychologist. I'm going to be talking about ways in which you can help people that you love actually get into therapy. So, very often there are people in our lives that we love deeply, we care about deeply. We see that they are in a state of suffering and that they could really use a helping hand in their healing journey, and either they're not really willing to take that next step or they just don't have access to taking the next step. And so we're going to be talking about how to help them get to that place so that they can experience the healing power of either therapy or whatever else. I see Anne, you're from Florida. Hey, I'm actually in Florida. I don't know if you see my backdrop is I'm in a different place in my own home, which is usually looks very different than this. So, hey, where else are people popping in from? Just let me know where you're connecting through live from, like what state are you in? I'm typically in my home state of New Jersey, but today I'm in Florida. And I still wanted to hold this live even though I'm far away from home. So I'm excited that y'all are popping in too. Toronto, okay. Hi from France. New York. Hi, Cassidy. So good to have y'all. There's a lot of people from Florida. I love this. I'm loving this. Okay, local to me, at least today. Enjoy the beaches. I most certainly am. I actually am super tanned. I don't know if you can tell, but I just came from being outside, and that felt really nice. Hi from New York. Enjoy your trip. Thank you. The Philippines. Okay, international. I love it. Well, we already had Toronto and France kind of in the building, so thank you all for tuning in. This is something that I'm really passionate about. I'm excited to talk to y'all about what we can do basically for the people that we love, especially if we ourselves are already in our process of healing and we're like, you know what? I know what this feels like. I know what healing feels like. I know what the journey is like. So I have that insider's knowledge and I want that for the people that I love. One, because I simply want to see them in healing. And two, because their healing also contributes to my own. So there is a little bit of a motivation that is driven by just improving the environments that you come home to, which that is to be honored too. Like, we can want people to heal so that we don't go back into chaotic environments, and that is completely fine. Whatever your motivation for hopping onto this live, I honor it. I'm here for it. All I want is for people to heal. That is my motivation in life. My professional motivation is the reason why I get into this work. And so if that is what you want for others, then I want to help you get there. So I want to take you through a couple steps, a couple things that I think are going to be really essential for you to consider in reference to how you can properly hold someone in their process. Because if you're on this live, then it's very likely that you're here because you've been met with some element of resistance or backlash, or that you see that it's a little bit hard to actually engage a person in reference to their own healing. And thank you for the likes, y'all. I appreciate them. So if that is the case, then we're going to get to that piece, and I'm going to take you through a psychological journey in reference to that piece. But before we get there, I do want to talk about the very first portion of what I was hoping to gather, what I was hoping to talk about within this live, which is how we can show support. Because very often there is a misconception that we have about how we can show up for someone. And typically that means that we either act as their pseudo therapist. That is not your job. That's not something that you need to do. You can be a listening ear for someone and only tentatively, right? create your own emotional boundaries so that you don't feel overwhelmed or depleted by the emotional state of this person. You can love a person and still hold an emotional boundary that says, I honor how I need to feel right now, and I honor how much space I can actually hold for this person, and I can hold the two together, right? Um, so it's going to be really important for you to like just be self-aware about what your own limitations are in terms of how much you can deposit into a person's life as far as support, how much support you can actually like handle, and whatever you cannot, it's okay. You're not their therapist, you're not their healing coach, you're not someone that, you know, needs to be holding profound space for their inner most deep pains. That's not your job. But a job that you can take on is a job of helping them along the path of one, destigmatizing, two, understanding the process of therapy and the process of healing, and three, getting to actual services. So the first is probably going to be the hardest one. And I think it's one that people spend months and sometimes years actually working on with the people in their lives, which is actually saying the words depression, anxiety, trauma, psychosis, anything, autism, um, and even some of the more like, you know, kind of like culture based terms like your inner child or your shadow or any of the things that can help that person understand there is an emotional part of you, and that emotional part is screaming for help and healing and love, and you actually need to attend to that. So the destigmatizing part is probably the lengthier part of helping somebody, because really you're going to have to help them unlearn everything that they've learned about their mental health, which more often than not, especially in this generation, is usually filled with myths and misconceptions and stuff that's just downright wrong. In our generation and in generations past, there's been this way in which we've like thought about our emotions that has been incredibly harmful and toxic and has not allowed us to actually emote in a way that has been healthy and has allowed people to disrupt cycles before they landed at the next generation. And so it's going to be like really important to really sit with that part of the work, with the debunking the myths and the misconceptions that exist in this person's life that are keeping them from seeking therapy and seeking any kind of emotional help. If you're still with me, like, shoot me a like, let me know you're still here, and maybe a thumbs up if any of it resonates with you. Because I know that we always want to quickly jump into everything that is like about getting the person into the treatment room without realizing that they can make it to the treatment room, but they won't last if they believe that they're flawed or that they're broken or that depression is something that's very unique to them or that something's wrong with them because they have anxiety. If they continue to hold on to those stigmas and those myths, they're not going to last in therapy. Is one of the things that we as therapists see so much, that there are people that will make it into that first session because they just can't anymore. They're so exhausted. They're just like, they're done. Like they've just taken on too much emotional overwhelm. But because they feel also the weight of the stigma of even being in the therapeutic process, they drop out of treatment. And so we don't see any healing taking place. What we see instead is a really bad journey through therapy. And then that reinforces the fact that therapy isn't helpful. So we don't want to land there. So because we don't want that to be the case, we want to make sure that we start with the process of destigmatizing the misconceptions about anything that's related to mental health. And maybe like some of y'all can like pop in like some of the more common mental health stigmas that you see like in your community, in your family. Like I think that can be helpful for people to read also. But some, that some of the ones that I mentioned are some of the popular ones, right? Like thinking that, like something is wrong with me because I'm depressed or because I'm anxious, like I'm just unique. There's this uniqueness that people tend to feel like is a part of their world, and they don't realize how incredibly common anxiety is. It is literally a very, especially in this generation, is incredibly common, and a lot of anxiety is actually really healthy, believe it or not. It's when it gets to the point of it being either chronic or debilitating is that we actually have to start looking at anxiety as something that we need to attend to and we need to treat. But anxiety is incredibly healthy, and it's just an emotional response that we tend to have when we worry about something, and that's fine, right? But if we're not having the conversations about the stigma piece and the fact that anxiety is something that is normal and needs to be attended to, then what's going to happen is that all of that's going to get brushed under the rug. It's never going to be dealt with. People are not going to be wanting to have the conversations first, and they're not going to actually like even do anything about the anxiety second. So I'm seeing in the comments that people are saying like real men and strong women don't need therapy. It's such a good one. So thank you for putting it on here, Anastasia. That is incredibly prevalent. And when you start layering on a lot of like the cultural pieces, there's a lot in there as well. My family's Jamaican, so here's one. There is no such thing as therapy, precisely, right? Like there are a lot of countries in the world where even the concept of therapy, I mean, we're talking about the US context now, and a lot of us, we're probably like US based, but I see France on here, I see Canada on here, right? The Philippines, like there are different ways that people see therapy based on their geography, right? So based on the country that they're in, based on how that country like deals with therapy or the resources around therapy. There's so many nuances, so we have to consider all of that in the process of destigmatizing. And the stigma of a bad Christian. Ooh. So when you start layering the identities and the cultural pieces, religion is one of those cultural pieces that I'm alluding to. So religion is also a part of what we need to be considering whenever we're talking about people not being open to therapy because they believe that in what's called like fatalism, like God will take care of it, right? But for many generations, this is still persisted inside of your family, and what it's doing is that it's causing a lot of unhealthy dynamics, right? And so if it's doing that, then maybe this is a time to look at both God and therapy, right? So that's a thing for sure. My grandma says it's in our heads and to man up. Yeah. I mean, we got to talk about toxic positivity and also like invalidation or chronic invalidation, which is one of the major and maybe least talked about ways in which trauma actually surfaces in families that, families tend to actually like chronically invalidate the children in the family. They grow up feeling like they don't matter, or like their emotions don't matter, and then the cycle continues and continues and continues. Thank you for sharing the live, y'all. So destigmatizing, that's one element. Also, like sharing resources with the destigmatizing piece. I want to make sure I don't leave that out. So if you feel like you don't know how to help a person to destigmatize in reference to their emotions and mental health, send them something that feels like it can help them. Sometimes, like for example, the tea session videos that I do, for anybody who's familiar, I do tea therapy sessions, and a lot of people tell me that they feel like therapy feels a little bit less scary when they see it that way on the screen. So if that's the case for you, then it might be really helpful to actually send a tea therapy session, not to like self-plug, but I made it with this intention to send it to a family member who may have been like really kind of like on the fence about therapy, and they can see, like, I mean, it's not actual therapy, but it is something that they can experience from a therapist, like actually talking to them. And maybe that can be the actual like piece of content that can help them to see, like, you know what, this isn't so bad. It isn't quite like how I imagined it. And that can be one of the major factors that can help them to take the next step. So destigmatize. We have to do that work. And please understand that the work to destigmatize is work that needs to happen for a very long time. It's unique to every individual, but it definitely needs to take time. So I just don't want you to rush through it and feel like if you send somebody a couple links, next week they're going to be ready for therapy. Temper your expectations, because that's going to help you and your own emotional process around this as well. Then we have to be sensitive to the timing of what's happening in their emotional world. Sometimes when we want to push people to therapy, it's when they're in crisis. Most often than not, and most often, and I worked in a hospital setting for several years. And in the hospital setting, when we got people into therapy was when they hit a huge crisis and they could not take it anymore, and they had no other option than to either be hospitalized or to enter therapy. And we don't want people to like come into therapy always just because there is a crisis, right? We want for there to be conscious thought and action around their emotional health. So when is a good time to have these conversations? Not just when a crisis occurs, but when a person is completely and utterly calm. And I mean that wholeheartedly. When a person is calm, when they're in their more calm state, whatever that may be, they have a greater capacity of actually listening to what you have to say. And if we want to take it to the scientific level, when a person is in a calmer state, they're not in a state of fight, flight, freeze, or fawn, meaning that their nervous system isn't in overdrive, which means that their cortical brain, the front part of your brain that's like situated right here, which is the part of our brain that allows us to be healthy problem solvers and to have proper executive functioning and to experience ourselves in a healthy way overall, that all of those elements of what happens inside of our brain is going to be, it's so basically like what happens in fight or flight is that a large part of those functions shut down. So if a person is in a calmer state, they're going to be able to access those functions a lot easier. If they can access those functions and they can problem solve and think clearly and be more receptive to what you're saying and have a deeper connection to you and to anything that you present, then they're going to be more susceptible to actually taking your advice, which means that they're going to be more likely to actually go to therapy. So you have to be strategic about these things too. If you tell a person in the heat of an argument, this is what you're always depressed and it's so frustrating, why don't you just go to therapy? They're likely to feel invalidated. They're likely to feel pathologized and stigmatized. And it's very likely that they won't go to therapy. Because your emotions are on edge, their emotions are on edge. They can't listen to you. Their cortical brain is partly shut down. And so nothing is getting through, right? And so you have to create the best possible situation for you to be able to have the conversation with this person, which means that you either catch them in a place when they're already in a calmer state, or you decide to create a calm ambiance for them so that they can feel at ease and hear what you have to say with greater facility, rather than just not hear it at all or push it out. The third thing along this vein that I wanted to cover is I kind of like hinted at this a bit, but is not over pathologizing a person or not pathologizing them at all. Because very often we get on the defense with people that are just hard-headed and don't want to get into treatment or like heal themselves in some way. What tends to happen in those moments is that we start talking about what they're going through, like we're a clinician. And before I was a clinician, I gotta say I was pretty guilty of that, like saying like, you're like really anxious, right? And even like maybe sometimes even to myself. And I think either to self or to others, it is not healthy. It isn't the way. And it actually creates a shutdown response, just the same as when you point the finger and tell somebody that they have to go to therapy. So, one thing to consider around this is that more often than not, we're probably not even right about what the diagnosis is that we're throwing at that person. We're saying like you're traumatized, or like you're depressed. We don't know. Like the person that's going to know best is a person that is a clinician and can do a proper evaluation. So you want to leave that to the professionals, right? And then the other thing to consider around that is that labels can be hurtful, and that person can internalize those labels, and you can very well be like the culprit of like having created those labels. You never want to be in that position. So just really stay away from the pathologizing and the like adding labels to any part of the conversation. Now, I might need to sip a little bit of tea for this one. And if you're having some tea with me, which would be pretty cool if you are, drop a note and let me know what kind of tea you're having, but also like it might be a good time to sip on your own tea. And I'm going to read some of the comments here. Oh, Cindy Perez is saying, what is pathologizing? Thank you for asking that. Okay, so pathologizing is basically like you calling something more unhealthy than what it actually is, or just calling something unhealthy, period. So pathology is basically the name of like a disease. It could be a physical disease or a mental health related condition. So, or any kind of condition that's like in the medical world is called a pathology. And when we pathologize, what we're doing is that we're adding basically a clinical label to something, like this person is depressed, like that's a label, right? So what I'm urging people to do is to not pathologize or not add the label unless you are absolutely certain and you can do it in a gentle way, or it's corroborated by a mental health clinician. So thank you so much for that question. That's actually a really great question. And I'm glad that we scaled back on that. If you have a tea question, definitely drop it in. Hi, Detroit. Nettle and mullein leaf tea. I'm gonna have to try that. Manzanilla. My mother drinks that all the time. That's like one of her favorites. So cheers to you all who are drinking tea. I love it. So don't over pathologize. Don't pathologize at all if you can help it. Thank you so much, Cindy, for that question. I think that's incredibly important to break down. So I'm hoping that was helpful to everybody. And then, I want to transition a little bit into the offering help piece, right? When we're getting to that place where we're ready to say, like, I think therapy might be a good idea, the first thing that we have to consider for ourselves is that we have to prepare for psychological resistance. And what I mean by that, this is where I get to nerd out a little bit. This is where it gets good. So psychological resistance is a process where a person basically feels like the experience feels overwhelming and they decide not to engage. So you may have heard of like coping defenses, psychological defenses, like any of that falls under the category of resistance. And typically what we tend to see when somebody wants to help somebody else to actually get help is that we get the resistance. And the reason why we get resistance is in part because the person is experiencing fear. When a person experiences fear around their healing, they're going to resist any kind of healing that is available to them. So when you're getting frustrated with folks because they're like not seeking help, you have to look at the emotion behind their action. The action is that they're not mobilizing and getting themselves to therapy. The emotion is that they're afraid of what healing can look like and feel like. And if you're somebody that has been in your own healing journey, then it's very likely that you know that it doesn't always feel good. And many times it actually feels rotten. It feels like you're in the mud. It feels like um, you're getting through like a lot of layers of deep hurt. And sometimes people are really afraid of actually doing all of that. And that's super valid. I mean, it's valid for you, it's valid for me, and it's valid for them. It's valid for all of us to actually have to, dig into the depths of our souls in order to be okay. It's scary stuff. And so, in part, what needs to happen in those moments is a ton of validation. You have to tell the person, I know that it can be scary, and I am with you. I can understand, like, if you're afraid, and I can assure you that it'll be worth it. You have to validate the experience, so the emotion, and validate the journey. Okay. So it's going to be like just so important for you to really attend to the underlying component of fear. Um, the other piece that is incredibly fear inducing in reference to the journey is something that us as humans, we don't deal with very well at all, which is the fear of the unknown. And fear of the unknown is something that basically catapults us into this existential crisis. Like we feel like, how, what is this, and how do, like, what is it that I'm going to get myself into? If you ever like have been, I don't know, on like anything random, zip lining, for example, I don't know, super random, but like zip lining for the first time, you have no idea what the sensations are going to be when you zip line. You have no idea like what's waiting for you on the other side. You don't know if you're going to fall, right? Like there's so much that's there, and all of it is in the unknown. And if you can like think about any experience that you might have that pushes you into the unknown, how you felt in that moment, that's going to give you an idea of how this person feels about therapy. This reminds me of my, yeah, so I'm guessing that it's like really hitting a nerve for folks. So yeah. Um, it's going to be like super, super important to have that consideration whenever we're having conversations that are hard to have. We always have to put the emotion in there, because we get so focused on the details of like, how do I do this? And we forget what is happening here. What's the emotion that's being reflected in this conversation? And if you can actually like hold on to that and understand that, it's going to give you a lot more space to hold compassion for this person, but also hold patience, which is going to be really, really important. First therapy session, thought I was ready, but no. Well, I'm glad that you went. Almost ready, and that's okay. Almost ready, that means that you're a step closer. Now, when you start offering to help, help can be from many resources. So I want to say that help is not just therapy. Help is healing. There's some healing coaches that are amazing. I'm a therapist and a coach. I have some classes that I dropped today, actually, which I'm so excited about. But I created a whole entire course around healing traumatic relationships, which is on my website. If anyone's interested in checking it out and letting me know what you think about it, because I worked on this really hard, and like I'm super excited about it. And hopefully any of you that are willing, can join me. But there are courses that can actually teach you healing practice and mechanisms for you to actually get yourself out of a traumatic state or anxiety or depression, or there's so many different resources. It's not just therapy, right? And so it's going to be so, so, so important for your offering of help to be varied so that that person can have different options. So therapy is an option, and you can provide therapy as a resource. You can provide any kind of healing coach or a coach that, can help that person in a specific area. Like maybe the actual thing that they're struggling with is ADHD. Maybe there is someone that's an ADHD coach or a nurse practitioner that can also prescribe medication, right? Or perhaps there is maybe a retreat that that person can attend that can actually give them like an in-depth immersive experience where they can actually understand the full depth of their emotional process. And so there are so many ways in which healing can take place. But if I, can extract from all of those therapy, which I know is a big one for a lot of folks, the things that get in the way of people actually making it to therapy are one, cost, two, stigma, right? So we've already talked about the stigma piece. And three, like access to quality care. Um, I want to note that on the cost end, it's going to be really important. Most people don't know this. And I think it's just such a failure of the health system for us to not tell people this on an ongoing basis, or for people to not have this knowledge. But in almost every single hospital system that exists, probably in most, I can't say with certainty in every country. However, in the US for sure, and in a lot of US like connecting countries for sure, every hospital system has a mental health service within it, especially major hospitals. And major hospitals are found in a lot of different areas, whether it's cities or rural areas. Major hospitals have housed within them psychiatric centers where there's mental health clinics, and those clinics offer therapeutic services at a lower rate or at no cost at all. And most people don't know that. A lot of people, especially when I started off in social media, would say like, but I can't afford therapy. Well, did you know that there are actually free to low cost services that can be found pretty locally to you? Most people don't know that. And I think it's such a sad fact that we exist in, just a world where we still don't have that knowledge base, because a lot of people could be using the tool of therapy and affording it. And so I just want to put that out there as like my first thing in reference to therapy, that there are resources that are readily available to folks that are free and accessible. So that's super important. However, there is also cost per session therapy sessions that are like at the regular cost. And those are available as well. And there are different ways of getting to those services. I think one of the major therapy directories is like Psychology Today. You have BetterHelp. You have some of the cultural ones like Therapy for Black Girls and Therapy for Latinx, right? Like you have all of those, and through there you can find and therapy. QPTOC, I think, is like queer and trans people of color therapists, or Ayana therapy. There's so many, like different identities are tailored to, or the services are tailored to different identities, right? So there are different options that people can have that are out there. And so I just want to urge people to find the options that are right for you, but just know that therapy doesn't always have to be expensive or inaccessible. There are therapeutic services that are quality. I mean, I'm not going to say that I'm, a quality therapist. I mean, I would love to say that I am without feeling like I'm being pompous about it. But myself and a lot of colleagues that I treasure the way that they approach the work, they just do good work. We were in one of these clinics inside of a hospital system for years. So it's not that you're receiving subpar care because you're in a free service. That's not the case. The hospital pays the clinicians their salaried payment. So the clinicians get paid by the institution, and they take in people at different levels of payment. And that's a fact, right? But it doesn't mean that you get subpar payment. It means that you get quality work, therapeutic work, and that the institution pays the clinician. So just hold that in consideration. And I worked in both the Spanish and English language, and primarily in Spanish. So these services are also available in a multitude of different languages. So please just know that piece. It's super, super important. When a person is in crisis, however, the most important thing to do for that person is to stabilize them. And stability, psychological stability for that person sometimes means that you have to take that person to the emergency room, or that you have to call 911. And that is an unfortunate part of how we have to orient a person through crisis, but eventually a very helpful one as well. Do people have any thoughts or any questions that I could answer that are very specific? Because that's kind of like most of my spiel, but I want to make sure that I, am like attending to any thoughts or questions that you may have come in here for. I do see some here, so I'm going to answer those as well. These are really good. So, do you feel the stigma of not attending therapy has a cultural element? I do believe that the stigma is pretty global, but that there are layers of, how certain cultures are really deeply against therapy that make it even harder for the people in those cultures to actually get services. Yes. So that's a really great question. So thank you for that. And I have seen that play out. And it's not just like something that I believe, it's actually something that's scientifically proven. Like we have like the data backing it. So this is something to consider. These are acrylic nails things. I see some questions about my services. I am currently only taking on students for my course, Healing from Traumatic Relationships, which is now live on my webpage, drmarielbouquet.com. So I'm not taking people on as therapy clients. I'm only taking folks on as group coaching clients through that course. So if you want to learn more about it, I can always, kind of like just place the link here at the bottom if that's helpful. But that's the way that you can work with me. And there I'm going to actually be helping folks with some healing practices. I'm going to be teaching for 5 weeks healing practices that are specific to trauma and to the experiences of like ongoing hurt and pain through the generations. And so hopefully that can be something that can be helpful for folks. But that's the way that I'm working with folks right now. Advice on starting your self-love journey. Self-love journey for yourself or for the people that you're hoping, to help is really essential. And it can start with like small things, y'all. Like we don't have to like overemphasize the self-love journey. It can literally start with you looking in the mirror tonight and saying, you're worthy. You're an incredible human. You're worthy of love. You're worthy of patience, of compassion. I love you, right? Like the self-love journey can be started as easily as by doing something like that. Yes. What is the difference between a healing coach and a therapist? Good question. So a therapist is a trained clinician who is medically trained to provide services that help a person heal through mental health conditions and is able to hold space for a person in a multitude of ways that is driven by clinical training. That clinical training is usually evidence-based, is what we call it. So it has been tested and proven to be able to be helpful in the area of mental health. And that person is also someone that can be there for a crisis. Like if a person is experiencing any kind of emotional overwhelm that is too overwhelming, if they're experiencing any self-harm or suicidality, that therapist can actually hold space for that person in those moments and also help them to get to the next level of care if they need it. A coach is someone that, and also a therapist can have a very open-ended type of way of working with a person, and they can, come in and talk about just about anything and allow the conversation to flow in whatever direction it needs to flow. With a coach, typically there is a prescribed and a predetermined way of that you're going to work together. And a coach typically has a set of scripts that they work from. and a very time limited time that they would work with you for. If a coach is working with you for an extended amount of time, typically that coach is like either a therapist or therapy trained, and they have a way of also helping you through other areas of life. If that coach is not trained in those areas, then usually the work that you do with that person is very time limited. And it's like, for example, if you have ADHD and your work, you want to get some coaching around ADHD, that coach will help you to um, learn how to compensate for the attentional deficit or the attentional like difficulties that you have with specific practices, and they teach you and coach you through the practices themselves and then help you to insert those practices into your daily life, right? Whereas a therapist might be talking to you about the ways in which it brings you deep anxiety to actually have ADHD because you have to tell a potential intimate partner and that's anxiety producing, or you have to uh, you constantly like are getting bad grades because or losing track of what you need to do at work because the ADHD gets in the way. And so like processing the emotions around that is more like along the lines of therapy. How did your parents feel about you pursuing this profession since you discussed cultural stigmas? Wow, great question. So my parents, they were pretty open. They didn't really kind of understand it at first, but eventually they actually like had a lot of pride with, the ways that I have decided to help. And they've been incredibly supportive. Tips on finding a quality therapist. What criteria beyond credentials should they meet? So, a person, I can treasure a therapist that goes into a specialized area and receives specialized training above and beyond just the, let's say, 2 years of training that they received if they were a master's level therapist, or a doctoral level clinician who is a psychologist. If they received 6 to 8 years of training like myself, that they still go above and beyond that to still procure additional training. Like, I am trauma informed, trauma trained, and I have several years of trauma training. And so that is a specialization that I have procured above and beyond just the general training. And I can treasure that as a healthy criteria to look for in the therapist that you're looking for yourself or for the person that you're hoping to help. Y'all, I think that is my time. I said I was going to do 45 minutes, like a 45-minute session. This is tea session. It has been so wonderful being with y'all. And, if you're hoping to learn more about working with me, then you can work with me through my healing course that's on my website. And I'm going to be having a lot more of these tea sessions. So definitely let me know what you want to learn more about in this live on YouTube. I think you can pop it in the actual comments section. So just pop it in there, let me know, and we're just gonna be talking because it's healing season, and I'm really excited to be here with y'all. So thank you for taking the time to just listen in, and I'm hoping that this has been really helpful for you and for the people that you love. Take care, y'all. Bye. Cheers.